What does dance say about society? From debutante balls to breakdancing, dance and the culture surrounding it can act as a reflection of values held by the dancers and their audience. When delving deeper into the diverse world of dance, gender perceptions are ingrained in its history, from its role in courtship to the gendered images it displays. In this video essay, we will be exploring the Puerto Rican Danza, a ballroom dance originating from 19th century Puerto Rico, and the gender perceptions conveyed through it. Before we can learn about the Puerto Rican Danza, we must first become familiar with the history of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a large island, located southeast of Florida above the Caribbean Sea. The initial inhabitants of the island, originally called Boricuan, were the Taino people, hunter-gatherers who solely populated Puerto Rico until the arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1493. Columbus claimed the island for Spain, and in 1508, Ponce de Leon founded its first European settlement, Puerto Rico, which then became the name for the island, the original port becoming its current capital, San Juan. Amidst the Spanish arrival, most of the Taino population was wiped out by disease and enslavement. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, the Spanish imported African slaves to Puerto Rico, building an economy based on plantation work. More Spaniards came to Puerto Rico, especially at the start of the 19th century, as they fled from revolutions in other Latin American countries. Immigrants to Puerto Rico were given free land and more economic freedom to reward Spanish loyalty. At the end of the 19th century, however, the Spanish-American War led to Puerto Rico becoming a Commonwealth of the United States, a status it has maintained to this day. With this in mind, let's move on to our discussion of the Puerto Rican Danza. Current-day danza composer Luciana Quiñones states that the danza is the maximum artistic expression of the Puerto Rican culture. The origins of the Puerto Rican danza are not well recorded. However, most historians agree on a similar sequence of events. At the beginning of the 19th century, the most prevalent form of dance in upper-class Puerto Rican circles was the Spanish contra danza, a ballroom dance in which a bastonero chose the placement, order, and number of couples for each song. The first dancers would be the most talented, and the following dancers were expected to copy their choreography. This often led to fights between dancers who did not perfectly mimic the leaders. Around 1839, the bastonero was retired, giving couples more freedom at these social dances. As the contra danza lost popularity, the habanera, brought by Cuban immigrants, grew more popular with the young Puerto Ricans, tired of the strict contra danza. Puerto Rican composers began writing their own dance pieces, evolving from the Cuban habanera. These pieces often had vulgar or satirical lyrics and allowed for couples to dance close enough to whisper to one another. This led to the Puerto Rican governor attempting to ban the danza. However, he was unsuccessful. The prototypical Puerto Rican danza did not emerge until Manuel G. Tavares and his student Juan Morel Campos began composing them. They elevated the genre from the habanera, creating a style unique to Puerto Rico, defined by contrasting duplets and triplets and inspired by love and women rather than debauchery. The work of these composers was adopted by the upper class and used as the ballroom dance for Puerto Rican social functions. Most of these characteristic Puerto Rican danzas can be divided into two categories, festive or romantic, based on tempo and melodic elements. The choreography of the danza is very simple. During the introductory section, called the paseo, the women interlace their left arm with their male partners and walk around the dance floor so all the partygoers can admire their beautiful gowns. They also fan themselves, and it is said that women developed a secret language of the fan to communicate with their partners without chaperones knowing. At the end of the paseo, the pair salute one another, the man imperceptibly nodding his head. The man places his right hand on the woman's waist and holds her right hand with his left. The woman places her left hand on his chest, controlling her distance from her suitor. Couples move freely throughout the room, however their feet barely leave the floor, and their thighs are meant to be stationary. While today these restrictions seem stifling, in its heyday the danza was considered an intimate dance. My grandmother told me that in yesterday's parties, the fan played an important role. With it, the marriageable girl with mischief and discretion sent messages to the subject of her love. This opening lyric to the modern danza, El Abanico, describes the oral tradition surrounding the language of the fan. The composer and lyricist Luciana Quiñones, much like most Puerto Ricans who are familiar with the danza, have heard about the language of the fan from their ancestors. Not much physical evidence of this language exists, however, accounts passed down through generations support its existence. The language of the fan was supposedly created by women who wished to communicate with their suitors without alarming las chaperonas, the older women who accompanied them. The fan is used to communicate the woman's engagement status as well as her opinion of her possible suitor. The language of the fan could warn men of the chaperone's arrival and direct them to a meeting place. The language of the fan, if it is not facetious, affords women far more agency than would be expected in a traditional dance environment. However, its creation illustrates the taboo nature of female sexuality, to where a woman's desire can only be expressed in secret. This implies that feminine passivity is ingrained at the heart of the danza, an obstacle overcome through the creation of the language of the fan. When dissecting the relationship between the danza and gender perceptions, what occurs off the dance floor is essential to the discussion. Violence against women was common in 19th century Puerto Rico. However, the laws surrounding it were also changing. Rituals of Violence in 19th century Puerto Rico, Individual Conflict, Gender, and the Law by Astrid Cubano Higuina analyzes Puerto Rican court archives related to gender crimes. Her research found that even though new laws were put into place to support women, their protection was meant to protect the men associated with them. One example of this is domestic violence, which was criminalized in 1870, not because of a woman's right to safety, but because it was the husband's job to protect the wife. The male dominance and emphasis on feminine purity found in the danza was present in the legal system. However, while the danza is centered upon honoring women, even if these women are denied agency in the process, violence against women still occurred. If the danza is reflecting cultural values towards women, how come it celebrates women when masculine violence against them was still prevalent? The 2001 study, An Ambivalent Alliance, Hostile and Benevolent Sexism as Complementary Justifications for Gender Inequality, describes the universal nature of two opposite yet complementary forms of sexism. It describes hostile sexism as antipathy towards women who are viewed as usurping men's power, and benevolent sexism as a subjectively favorable, chivalrous ideology that offers protection and affection to women who embrace conventional roles. The research also finds three sub-factors of benevolent sexism: protective paternalism, complementary gender differentiation, and heterosexual intimacy. Compared to hostile sexism, benevolent sexism is more likely to be supported by women, especially in cultures where women are more threatened by men. While benevolent sexism may seem harmless, it still sees women as less valuable than men, even if they are essential to them. The ideology also justifies harmful behavior against women who do not adhere to gender roles, as they are no longer quote-unquote good women. The danza praises the women who conform to male expectations, placing value on their beauty and purity, as well as their position as the subject of male love. In fact, even to this day, despite the danza falling out of popularity in Puerto Rico, it is still associated with feminine purity. In 2011, Las Fiestas de Santiago Apostol introduced the danza in their festivities, despite its long absence from the Puerto Rican holiday. During Las Fiestas de Santiago Apostol, meant to honor the patron saint of Loiza, there are 3 processions honoring men, women, and children. Usually, the music for all 3 processions is the bomba, more popular in the area. However, in 2011, during the procession for women, the bomba was replaced with the danza, which was seen as a more pious genre. This shows that the danza is associated with feminine value. However, such value is placed on beauty and purity. The more profane bomba still remained for the other parades, alienating women from the more popular genre, implying the fundamental differences between women and men found in the ideology of benevolent sexism. The Puerto Rican danza has its place in Puerto Rican culture, however, it is still absent from music classrooms across the country. Even on the island, the danza is not considered an intellectual genre, not included in the training of young musicians. In the States, the danza is unheard of, hardly discussed in a field dominated by European music. While this tradition is a vehicle for benevolent sexism, the dance and music themselves still hold cultural, historic, and aesthetic value. However, if the danza is excluded from musical academia, it is bound to fade into obscurity, even with efforts to modernize the genre. As it is the pinnacle of Puerto Rican artistic expression, if it is not studied and taught, then how can it evolve? I personally hope you take this opportunity to listen to a danza, and if you are a musician, learn to play one yourself. Hopefully, in spreading this music to academic spaces, the discussion surrounding its position in Puerto Rican culture can be continued. Thank you for watching.